Today, I want to share with you a story about the kind of love that doesn't start with fireworks or stolen kisses. It's a story about the love that begins in the dust, in the quiet moments when everything falls apart, and about a woman who had to lose her pride to find her place. This is the story of Sarah Miller and the day her life changed forever, in the town of Willow Creek. Willow Creek woke early that morning, the way it always did before a wedding. There was a specific energy in the air, a kind of electric hum that seemed to lift the dust soft from the ground. The church bell sat waiting to be rung, and all across the valley, neighbors were pulling on their Sunday boots. The talk already buzzing about the prettiest girl in town, marrying the wealthy horse rancher. Folks liked a love story. They could point at something tidy and hopeful in a land that rarely offered either. But while the town prepared for a celebration, Sarah Miller stood in the back room of the boarding house, her hands raw from scrubbing laundry since dawn. At 28, Sarah had the look of a woman much older, not from age, but from duty. Life had carved out her softness early on and left behind a kind of quiet sturdiness. She wore a plain dress, her hair pulled tight against her scalp, her face without the shine or the paint that men seemed to admire so much. Everyone said her younger sister, Leela, had taken all the beauty the good Lord intended for the Miller family, and perhaps more besides. And Sarah never argued. She simply loved her sister, fiercely and quietly, the way a root loves the flower it anchors. The boarding house was unusually empty that morning. Everyone had gone to gather wildflowers for the church or practice hymns for the ceremony. It made the quiet feel strange, stretched, thin, like a rubber band pulled to its limit, like something was wrong, but hadn't yet shown itself. That was when the silence turned cold. Sarah realized she hadn't seen Lila since the night before. She wiped her hands on her apron and checked her sister's room. The door was halfway open, and a cold breeze slipped through the cracked window. Inside, Lila was bent over a trunk, stuffing clothes into a carpet bag, silk dresses, a pair of shiny heels some cattle buyer had gifted her, and a leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. Sarah froze in the doorway. Lila, what are you doing? Leela didn't even flinch. She just tossed a shawl into the bag and kept packing. She was as radiant as ever, dark curls falling over one shoulder, lips curled in that careless smile that folks at the saloon paid good money just to see. She looked more like she was preparing for a night on the stage than her own wedding morning. What does it look like I'm doing? She said lightly, snapping the bag shut. I'm leaving. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Leaving. The wedding is in an hour. Ethan is waiting at the church. Everyone is. Let them wait. Sarah stepped closer, panic rising in her chest. Leela, you can't. Ethan loves you. He's a good man. Who in their right mind? Lila cut in, her eyes flashing with a cruel amusement. Would want to marry a half Apache widower, a man who broods more than he speaks, a man 10 times too serious for me. Sarah felt the words land like a slap. She swallowed hard. Ethan is a good man. That's the problem. Leela snapped. Good men are boring. A shadow crossed the window then. Sarah caught sight of a horse tied off in the back alley, a bay gelding with a lopsided saddle. Leaning against it was a man Sarah had seen around town, a traveling saloon singer with slick hair and a grin too wide for honesty. It hit her then, a sick realization settling in her stomach. Leela, Sarah whispered, pointing to the pouch on the bed. That's your whole savings. And Ethan's gifts. All the money he set aside for the baby. What about your son? What about little Jack? Lila rolled her eyes, adjusting her hat in the mirror. Here, let me give you a little secret. Sarah. She leaned in, her voice low and mocking. That baby isn't Ethan's. Never was. Sarah's knees nearly buckled. She grabbed the doorframe for support. He's mine and Sam's. Lila continued, jerking her chin toward the man outside. We've been planning this for months. Ethan was just a convenient stepping stone. She winked, a gesture so casual it was monstrous. And you believed all that true love nonsense. Oh, sweet, simple Sarah, you're abandoning your own child. Sarah whispered, horrified. Oh, please. Leela tossed her hair. The kid will live. You're good with babies. You'll raise him. You're the motherly type. Then, with a final smirk, Lila pushed past her sister and hurried out the door. Outside, the man, Sam, swung her up onto the saddle. The two of them rode hard down the alley, a spray of dust rising behind them like smoke after a gunshot. Sarah stood there, trembling, the cold morning air cutting through her dress. She looked down at the empty dresser drawer, then at the crib in the corner where baby Jack was sleeping. A sick heaviness settled in her stomach. God help us, she thought. What have you left me to fix this time? Leela, she grabbed her shawl. She didn't run to stop them. They were long gone. She ran toward the church. Because someone had to tell the man in black that his world had just ended. The whole town was already gathered. 200 folks, ranch hands, traders, widows, school children, every one of them dressed in their Sunday best. The sheriff stood on the steps, adjusting his badge. The preacher smoothed his surplice, and inside, at the altar, Ethan Caldwell waited. He was stoic, dark-eyed, wearing a black coat that fit him like it had been sewn from the night sky. His infant son, Jack, or the boy he thought was his son, sat in the crook of his arm, fussing softly. Sarah made it halfway down the aisle before the sheriff looked up and frowned. Where's the bride? Whispers rippled across the pews, like wind through dry wheat. Sarah tried to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. Her hands shook violently. She saw Ethan's gaze meet hers. It was quiet, searching. A kind of understanding was already forming there, though she didn't know why. Then the sheriff snorted and barked. Well, hell, she ain't coming. Figures. That saloon girl always was slippery. Laughter erupted in the church. It wasn't kind laughter. It was sharp and jagged. Should have known she'd run off. Someone shouted, Poor Ethan. Man ought to pick better stock. The humiliation burned Sarah's face. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to sink into the floorboards. But the sheriff wasn't done. He shoved Sarah forward, right toward the altar. Then the sister will stand in, the sheriff announced, as if he were ordering a replacement part for a wagon. Let's finish this circus before noon. The folks roared with mocking delight. Her, a woman in the front row, cackled. Lord help him. She cooks well enough. But marry her man. He'd be better off with a mule. Sarah felt her face burn. Tears pushed hot against her eyes. She stood there. The spinster sister. The consolation prize. Stripped of her dignity in front of God and everyone she knew. But then, movement at the altar stopped the laughter. Ethan Caldwell stepped down. He moved with that slow, measured confidence of his. He shifted the baby to one arm and took Sarah's hand with the other. His grip was warm, rough, and calloused. His voice carried through the church, low but strong, cutting through the mockery. I want her. I'll marry her. Silence fell like a dropped anvil. Sarah stared at him, her breath shaking. Ethan wasn't smiling. He wasn't pitying her. He was choosing calmly, deliberately. He was looking at her, not as a substitute, but as a solution. As the only person in the room who hadn't run away, the preacher cleared his throat, too stunned to protest. Well, then let us begin. And so, with the whole town watching in disbelief, Sarah Miller Plain. Overlooked, Sarah stood beside a man who had just had his heart broken and spoke the vows that were meant for her sister. Her voice trembled, but she spoke every word. And Ethan Caldwell, steady as a mountain, spoke them back. Ethan, take thee. Sarah. When it was done, they exchanged no kiss. No celebration followed. The crowd dispersed with murmurs of shock and gossip thick enough to choke on. Sarah glanced at Ethan, unsure what came next. He only said, "Come, we should get home." Home? A word that had never felt so heavy. As they walked out of the church and climbed into his wagon, Sarah realized the terrified truth. She was now the wife of a stranger. She was the mother to a child that wasn't hers. And she was heading to a ranch, out in the wild sagebrush, with a man who had just promised to love and cherish her, while his heart was likely chasing a ghost down a dusty road. The morning was shattered. But as the wagon wheels began to turn, Sarah Miller straightened her back. She didn't know if this was a tragedy or a rescue. But she knew one thing: she wouldn't be the one to break. The ride to Ethan's ranch stretched long across the open country, the wagon wheels creaking over dry ruts left from the last rain. Sarah sat beside him, hands clenched in her lap, her new wedding band feeling heavy and foreign on her finger. Ethan held the reins with one hand and his son, little Jack, with the other. The boy nestled against his chest. Neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't angry. Exactly. Just wide and dusty, like the plains themselves. Sarah kept her gaze fixed on the horizon where the sagebrush rolled in the wind like gray waves. She had traveled this route 100 times to deliver bread or trade eggs. But today, the land felt different. Everything familiar had shifted an inch to the left. The world she knew was gone, replaced by this strange, quiet, terrifying, new life. By the time the ranch came into view, sprawling corrals, a long barn, and a weather-beaten house perched on a rise, Sarah's throat had tightened so much she could barely swallow. Ethan stopped the wagon and climbed down. "Come on," he said quietly. "I'll show you the house." There was no welcome, no warmth, just necessity. Sarah stepped inside. The kitchen smelled faintly of wood, smoke, and old coffee grounds. A stove squatted in one corner, its iron belly cold now. Everything was clean, simple, almost military, in order a man's house. Kept neat for duty's sake, not comfort. He led her through the sitting room, past pictures of his late wife, and up the narrow stairs. He stopped at the last door on the right. He paused there, hesitating, his hand hovering over the latch. That hesitation frightened her more than anything else. He pushed the door open. Sarah stepped inside, and her breath left her. The room was small, tiddy, sunlit from a window facing the hills. But everywhere were signs of Lila. On the dresser sat a silk ribbon Leela used to tie in her hair. On the wall hung a charcoal sketch of her laughing, curls tumbling over her shoulders. A music box Ethan had bought her sat on the bedside table. Even the quilt on the bed was stitched from scraps of bright, flashy dresses Lila had once worn for her saloon performances. Ethan's voice was stiff behind her. This was meant to be the bridal room. Sarah nodded, though her throat had closed so tight she couldn't speak. She touched the edge of the quilt. Her fingers trembled. She had spent her whole life in Lila's shadow. Every birthday, every Sunday sermon, every town dance. Lila had been the comet streaking across the night sky, and Sarah had been the dust left behind. But standing in this room, surrounded by the ghost of the sister who had betrayed them both, a pain deeper than humiliation struck her. She whispered, barely audible, "I can sleep somewhere else." "No?" Ethan's tone sharpened, startling her. "You'll sleep here. It's the only room with a proper lock, and a mattress not older than 20 years. He stepped inside and began gathering Lila's things. He picked up the sketch, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then set it face down. It should have been cleared out, he muttered. Sarah shook her head. "No. It's fine." He looked at her then. Really looked at her for the first time since the wedding. His dark eyes studied her face plain. Earnest. Tired. Something flickered there. Not affection. Maybe sympathy. Or pity. And pity hurt worse. He straightened up, his frame filling the small room. "Sarah, listen to me," he said. She braced herself. "We're married because that was the only way to keep my boy from being raised on gossip and scandal," he said, his voice calm and controlled. "But we are not husband and wife in the way folks mean it. I won't touch you. I won't expect anything of you. You don't owe me affection or loyalty or love. You can live your life upstairs. I'll take the cot in the kitchen. We'll raise the boy as best we can until he's grown." Sarah nodded, blinking fast. He wasn't cruel, just honest. And honesty in that moment cut deeper than any lie. Ethan set the baby, little Jack, onto the bed. The boy immediately reached for Sarah with his small, chubby hands. She took him instinctively, pressing him to her shoulder. His warmth was the only anchor she had in the storm. "I'll be in the barn," Ethan said softly, almost gruffly. "Call if you need anything." Then he left her standing there, the unwanted bride in the wrong woman's room, holding the child her sister had abandoned. That night, Sarah lay in the bed, surrounded by the scent of lavender, Lila's perfume. She cried into the pillow, quiet, shaking sobs that no one heard. She cried for the ruined wedding, for the baby, for Ethan, and mostly for herself. But as the moon rose, casting long shadows across the floor, the tears stopped. Sarah Miller was done crying. Morning came slow to the Double C Ranch. Sunlight crept over the mesa, warming the frost that clung to the corral rails. From inside the house, the soft cry of a 1-year-old carried through the thin wooden walls. Sarah was already awake. She had barely slept. Not from discomfort, but from uncertainty. Everything felt unfamiliar. The bed, the room, the future. But little Jack didn't understand any of that. He only understood hunger and cold fingers and the need to be held. So Sarah washed her face, tied her hair back, and gathered the baby into her arms. "Good morning, sweet boy," she whispered. "Looks like it's just you and me again, downstairs." The stove was still cold. Ethan must have gone out before sunrise. Sarah laid Jack in a basket lined with a blanket and knelt at the stove, stacking kindling the way her mother had taught her. She struck a match. It went out. She struck another. The flame flashed bright, then fizzled. She said, "Well, this ain't a great start, is it?" Jack babbled in agreement, or possibly mockery. On the third try, the flame held. Sarah fed the fire until warmth filled the kitchen. She found coffee grounds on the shelf and brewed a pot so strong it nearly peeled the lining off her throat. But it was hot, and it was hers. She fried eggs, burned the first two, saved the third. A loaf of yesterday's cornbread softened in a pan with a dash of milk by the time Ethan stepped inside, brushing dust off his coat. The kitchen smelled almost welcoming. He paused in the doorway, taken aback by the sight. Sarah humming softly, sleeves rolled up, hair coming loose. The baby waving a wooden spoon like a tiny outlaw. Ethan cleared his throat. "You've cooked." Sarah straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, I tried." Jack squealed and held the spoon toward Ethan like an offering. The gesture softened something in the rancher's stiff shoulders. He took the spoon and tapped it gently against the baby's palm, earning a giggle. Sarah served breakfast, embarrassed by the burned edges. Ethan sat, tasted it, and nodded wisely. "It's good. You don't have to be kind," she murmured. "I'm not," he said simply. "I'm hungry." That startled a laugh out of Sarah, a small, unguarded sound she didn't know she still had in her. The next few days slipped into a rhythm neither had planned but both accepted. At dawn, Ethan milked the brindle cow while Sarah swept the yard, Jack strapped to her hip in a makeshift sling. By mid-morning, Sarah washed laundry in a tin basin, humming to keep the baby calm. Ethan repaired fence posts in the corral, glancing toward the house more often than he meant to. It wasn't affection, not yet. It was a slow thaw. One afternoon, Sarah attempted to carry a bucket of feed to the barn. The bucket was heavier than she expected, full of dense grain. She stumbled halfway across the yard, the handle digging into her palm. Ethan appeared beside her before she could fall. "Let me." "No," she insisted, breathless. "I can do it. You're carrying 40 pounds of grain." I said, "Let me." He didn't take the bucket from her immediately, but he placed a hand at the small of her back to steady her until she reached the barn door. The heat of his hand through her dress made her heart stutter. Inside, the horses snorted curiously at the intrusion. Sarah stepped back instinctively. "They're bigger up close," she whispered. Ethan's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something near it. "They won't harm you. Just don't startle them." "I'm not afraid." She lied. "Is that so?" A chestnut mare poked her head over the stall, snorted loudly, and shook dust into the air. Sarah yelped and stumbled backward right into Ethan's chest. His hands shot out to steady her, gripping her arms. She froze. He froze. For a heartbeat, they were pressed together, the scent of hay and leather wrapping around them. It was the first time they had touched since the altar. The mare blinked at them, unimpressed. Then, baby Jack, riding on Sarah's hip, broke the tension with a delighted squeal. Ethan stepped back quickly, clearing his throat. pretending nothing had happened. But something had happened. Small, fleeting, but real. The true turning point came a week later. It was a warm afternoon when Sarah noticed something wrong with the bay stallion tied near the barn. The horse was pawing at the ground. Muscles, twitching, and foam coated the edges of his mouth. Sarah frowned. She had grown up around farms, even if she hadn't run one. She walked closer. "Ethan," she called out. He came running from the tack room. "What is it?" She pointed. "His left hind leg, see how he's favoring it, and he's sweating too hard for the weather." Ethan crouched beside the horse, his jaw tightening. "Damn it. That's the third one this week." He looked exhausted. The circles under his eyes were dark bruises. He was a man fighting a losing battle, trying to keep a ranch alive with a broken heart and a short-handed crew. Sarah's mind worked quickly. She remembered walking past the lower pasture yesterday. She remembered how the trough water smelled stale, sweet like algae. She remembered the feed bin outside. The lid cracked from last winter's storm. She whispered, "Ethan, I think it's the water. And maybe the old feed." He looked at her sharply, skepticism written all over his face. "What makes you say that?" "The horses that are sick drink from the lower trough," she said, her voice gaining strength. "The ones closer to the barn seem fine. And that feed bin. There's mold on the bottom. I smelled it when I walked by." Ethan didn't dismiss her. He didn't tell her to go back to the kitchen. He stood up and marched to the feed bin. He dug his hand deep into the grain and pulled up a handful. It was damp and spotted with gray mold. He looked at Sarah. And for a moment, he didn't look at her like a stranger. He looked at her like a partner. "Get the clean buckets," he said. By nightfall, the ranch had transformed into a field hospital. Sarah boiled bucket after bucket of clean water on the stove. Ethan hauled it to the corral. They worked side by side beneath the lantern light while baby Jack slept inside. A towel rolled next to him so he wouldn't roll off the pallet. For hours, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. They moved around each other with an efficiency that usually takes years to build. Sarah mixed a mash of clean oats and molasses. She wiped the foam from their mouths. He checked their hooves. Her dress was stained with mud. Her hair had fallen loose from its pins. Her arms ached with a deep, burning fatigue. But she didn't stop. And neither did he. When the last of the horses finally settled, breathing easier, the moon was high and bright. Ethan leaned against the fence, chest heaving, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "If you hadn't noticed it," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion, "I might have lost half the herd." Sarah wiped her own brow, leaving a smudge of dirt on her cheek. Anyone would have noticed. She deflected softly. Ethan turned to her. The lantern light caught the sharp angles of his face. "No," he said quietly. "Not anyone." The words hung in the air. He wasn't talking about ranch hands. He was talking about Lila. Lila, who never looked at a horse unless it was pulling a carriage she was riding in. Lila, who wouldn't have known mold from moss. Ethan looked at Sarah then. Really looked at her. He didn't see the plain sister. He didn't see the substitute bride. He saw a woman with dirt on her face and steel in her spine. He saw the woman who had just saved his livelihood. "You have good hands, Sarah," he murmured. Her cheeks flushed, warmer than the exertion warranted. She looked away, fumbling for something to say. "We should check on Jack." They walked back to the house together, the distance between them feeling a little less like a canyon and a little more like a path. Inside, they found Jack awake. He had managed to wiggle off his palate and was currently chewing enthusiastically on the brim of Ethan's cowboy hat, which had been left on a chair. "You gave him your hat?" Sarah asked, a tired smile tugging at her lips. "He stole it," Ethan replied, dead serious. Jack smacked the brim with a triumphant squeal, drool glistening on the felt. Ethan sighed, a long, weary sound that ended in a chuckle. "Guess he's the boss." Sarah laughed, a full, genuine sound that filled the kitchen. It startled them both. It was the sound of a house coming back to life. Ethan watched her laugh. The tension that had held his shoulders high for months seemed to drop an inch. He realized, with a jolt of surprise, that he didn't want to be anywhere else. He realized that while he had been mourning the woman who left, the woman who stayed had been quietly, steadily, holding his world together. "Go to sleep, Sarah," he said softly. "You've earned it." As Sarah walked up the stairs that night, her legs aching, but her heart strangely light, she knew something had changed. The ghost in the room upstairs felt a little fainter, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a stranger in her own house. She felt like she was home. Spring storms had a way of rolling fast across the valley, sudden and violent, like a temper that had been held in too long. One moment, the sky was a pale, innocent blue. The next, thick clouds were piling up like bales of black wool over the mountains, and the wind was snapping at the fence lines. By late afternoon, the sky over the Double C Ranch had turned the color of a bruised plum. Sarah stood on the porch, holding baby Jack close against the rising wind, watching Ethan work to bring the last of the horses into the main corral. The first crack of lightning split the sky, jagged and white. Sarah flinched. From the yard, Ethan turned and waved her back. "Go inside, Sarah. It's coming hard." She didn't argue. She hurried into the house just as the heavens opened. Rain pelted the windows with a fury that sounded like thrown gravel, and the roof groaned under the sudden assault. Baby Jack whimpered at the noise, burying his face in Sarah's neck. She wrapped him in a wool blanket and rocked him softly, humming a low tune against the roar of the thunder. A moment later, the front door blew open. Ethan stepped inside. Drenched, rain ran from the brim of his hat onto the floorboards in small, dark pools. He shoved the door shut against the blast of wind and leaned his back against it, catching his breath. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough. "We're fine." Sarah motioned toward the sleeping baby. "Just loud." Ethan exhaled, a long sound of relief, and shrugged off his wet coat. The room was dim, the storm swallowing the daylight. So Sarah moved to light the oil lamp on the table. The flame flickered, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. "I made a pot of stew earlier," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the drumming of the rain. "It turned out better than last week's." "That's not a high bar," Ethan replied, deadpan. Sarah bit back a smile. "Just take the compliment." "Ethan," he did, quietly. When Jack finally settled into a deep sleep in his cradle, Sarah set a plate at the table for Ethan. She spooned the stew into a bowl and poured hot coffee into a tin cup. She made a small plate for herself and sat, not at the far end of the table, as she usually did, but closer. The lamplight softened Ethan's features. It smoothed the sharp lines of his jaw and filled in the shadows beneath his eyes. He looked less like the stoic rancher the town feared, and more like a man shaped by loss, A man who had learned to survive by endurance rather than hope. Halfway through supper, the lantern flickered violently as thunder shook the floorboards. The flash of lightning turned the room white for a heartbeat. Sarah startled, dropping her spoon with a clatter. Ethan set his bowl down, watching her. "You don't care for storms?" "No," she admitted, wiping her damp palms on her apron. "Not when they're angry like this." Ethan stood up. For a moment, she thought he was leaving, retreating to the barn or his cot in the corner. But he moved to the windows, checking each latch, tightening them against the wind. Then he returned to the table. He didn't sit back down. Instead, he leaned a hip against the edge of the counter, crossing his arms, looking down at her. "You did good with the horses last week," he said out of nowhere. Sarah looked up, surprised. "I only noticed something wrong." "No," Ethan corrected her, his voice low. "You paid attention. You cared enough to look." Anyone else would have walked past. Her cheeks warmed. She looked away, fumbling for something to say. But the air in the kitchen had shifted. It felt thick, charged, like the moment right before a match strikes flame. When the stew was finished, Ethan reached for the coffee pot, but found it empty. He looked over his shoulder at her. "You want a night drink?" Sarah blinked. "Whiskey, just a sip," he said, to take the edge off the storm. She hesitated, then nodded. Ethan retrieved a bottle from the high shelf and poured a finger's worth of amber liquid into 2 tin cups. He sat down next to her, this time shoulder to shoulder, the wood of the chair legs scraping softly against the floor. The smell of oak and fire filled the small space between them. Sarah took a cautious sip and winced as the heat hit her throat. "Burns," she whispered. "That's how you know it's working," Ethan said. She laughed quietly, and the sound made something loosen in Ethan's chest. They sat there for a long time, listening to the rain hammer, the roof, the warmth of the whiskey settling in their bellies. Ethan rested his elbows on the table, holding his cup between his hands. He stared into the dark liquid for a long moment before speaking. "Sarah," he said softly, "I owe you the truth." She tensed, bracing herself for something sharp. "I heard everything," he said. "That morning, outside the boarding house, I heard Lila. I heard the man she was leaving with. I heard what she said about the baby." Sarah's breath caught. She turned to look at him, her eyes wide. "I knew she wasn't coming to that church long before the sheriff shoved you down the aisle," Ethan continued, his jaw tightening. "But I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should stop the wedding or let the town chew her up. I thought maybe she'd change her mind." "You loved her?" Sarah asked. It wasn't an accusation. It was a question that needed an answer. "Yes," he answered, no hesitation. "I did." Then, more quietly, "But love didn't make her stay." The honesty was brutal, but it wasn't cruel. It was just true. Thunder cracked again, shaking dust from the rafters. But Sarah didn't flinch this time. She was too focused on the man beside her. "I didn't choose you out of pity, Sarah," Ethan said, turning his head to meet her gaze, "or because the sheriff demanded it. When I stepped toward you that day, I saw someone who didn't run." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers on the table, before finally covering it. His palm was warm, rough with work, and incredibly steady. "I saw someone who stood still when everything else fell apart," he whispered. "You held my boy like he belonged to you." Like you already loved him. Sarah's eyes stung with sudden tears. I didn't marry the wrong woman. Ethan said, I just didn't realize the right one was standing in front of me. Sarah's heart beat so hard, her ribs ached. The kitchen felt suddenly small, intimate. The rest of the world washed away by the rain. Ethan took another sip of whiskey. Almost, for courage. Then set the cup down with a soft clink. He leaned in closer. Sarah, he murmured, I'd like to kiss you, but only if you want that. The gentleness in his voice, the respect of asking, after everything that had been forced upon them, undid her completely. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, Sarah nodded. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His lips brushed hers warm, hesitant at first. Tasting of rain and whiskey. It wasn't the hungry, desperate kiss of a young boy. It was the kiss of a man who had known grief, and was finally tasting hope again. Sarah's hand found the front of his shirt, clutching the fabric lightly. Ethan's arm came around her waist, pulling her flush against him. The kiss deepened, becoming a kind of ache that had been building quietly between them for weeks, hidden under layers of duty and silence. When he finally pulled back, his breath was unsteady against her cheek. Come with me, he whispered. He took her hand and led her out of the kitchen. They walked up the narrow stairs, the rain pounding a rhythm on the roof. But he didn't turn toward the room at the end of the hall, the room filled with lila's ribbons and the smell of lavender. He walked past it. He led her to the spare room at the other end of the hall. It was a simple room that smelled of cedar and clean dust. A room with no ghosts in it. He opened the door and looked at her, a silent question in his eyes. Sarah stepped across the threshold, pulling him with her. There, beneath the beating storm, they shed the last of their walls. They weren't husband and wife by force anymore. They were two people who had wandered through the dark long enough to recognize refuge when they found it. Later, when the thunder had softened to a distant grumble, Ethan traced a hand through Sarah's hair as she lay beside him. I'll clear out that old bridal room tomorrow, he murmured into the darkness. Every piece of her, every mark of her. Sarah closed her eyes, a single tear slipping onto his shoulder. It'll be our room now, he whispered, and for the first time since the day she stepped into this broken world, Sarah believed it could be true. They were no longer pretending. The storm had washed the past away. Summer settled over the Double C Ranch like a heavy, warm quilt. The days stretched long and unhurried. The horses were healthy again, their coats shining under the sun, and the corrals were full of restless energy. Inside the house, a different kind of energy had taken root. Laughter. It was soft, quiet laughter. The kind that belonged to people learning how to be a family. Ethan and Sarah woke most mornings with little Jack curled between them. The boy's small hand tangled in Ethan's shirt. Ethan had kept his word. The bridal room upstairs had been scrubbed clean of Lila's perfumes and silk ribbons. He hung no pictures yet, saying he wanted to build new memories before they framed them. But the space no longer felt haunted. Life, for once, had a rhythm. And then, one afternoon, that rhythm broke. Sarah was kneading dough at the kitchen table when she heard the crunch of wagon wheels outside. It wasn't Ethan. He was out riding the fence line along the South Ridge. It wasn't the mail carrier. He came on Tuesdays. She wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch. A wagon, an old, sun-bleached thing with a wobbling wheel, dragged itself up the road. On the driver's bench sat a man Sarah didn't recognize. Thick-shouldered and mean-looking. A cigar clenched between yellow teeth. And beside him, Sarah's breath stalled. But this woman looked nothing like the sparkling beauty who had vanished months ago. Her dress was torn at the hem, dust caking the lace. Her hair hung in tangled ropes around her shoulders. And her face, once vibrant, was pale with exhaustion. More shocking still was the swell of her belly beneath the fabric. She was pregnant, heavily so. Lila lifted her head and spotted Sarah. Her lips quivered. "Sarah," she croaked. "Oh, thank God." The man jumped down, spit on the dirt, and barked. "Where's the rancher? We need money. And we need a place for her to rest." "You hear me?" Sarah felt a cold chill settle deep in her spine. She stepped down from the porch. "Lila, what happened?" Lila burst into tears, big, dramatic sobs. But unlike the performances of her youth, these tears felt desperate. "Please," Lila whispered, reaching out with shaking hands. "I have nowhere else to go. He isn't the father. I ran out of money. Sarah, I made mistakes. Please help me." Sarah stared at her sister. This was the woman who had abandoned her baby. The woman who stole every coin Ethan had saved. The woman who mocked honest love and left her family to face the shame she created. Once, Sarah would have stepped between her sister and every danger in the world. Once, she would have taken the beating, the blame, and the burden just to keep Lila from hurting. But that Sarah was gone. Sarah gently pulled her hands free. "Lila," she said softly, "I am not your refuge anymore." Lila's expression twisted. The sweetness drained away like water through sand. "What does that mean, Sarah? Don't do this to me. You did this to yourself," Sarah said. The man stepped forward, growling, "Listen, lady. She's sick. You're going to take her in." Sarah met his glare with a calm that surprised even her. "You can leave my property now." "You got some nerve." "No." Sarah stepped closer, unflinching. "You don't get to speak for her. Or for me." Lila turned back to Sarah, her voice rising in panic. "Sarah, please. I'm your sister." Sarah shook her head. "Sisters don't abandon their babies. They don't lie. They don't steal. They don't destroy everything in their path and then ask someone else to sweep it up." Lila's face contorted in fury. Her fear twisted into something vicious. "You heartless cow," she screamed, loud enough for the ranch hands in the far field to hear. "You always hated me. You always wanted what I had. And now you stole my man, and my child, and my whole life." Zara froze. The front gate creaked open. Ranch hands came nearer, whispering. Dust swirled up from the commotion. Neighbors were stopping on the road. Lila climbed down from the wagon, staggering forward, pointing at Sarah like an accuser at a hanging. "Look at her. She took everything from me. Ethan was supposed to marry me. Jack is mine. She stole them both and made you all think she's some saint." A crowd began forming. Neighbors, hands from nearby fields. Even old Mrs. Turner with her cane. Sarah stood still, her heart pounding against her ribs. She didn't defend herself. She didn't shout. She didn't even look away. She'd spent her whole life breaking under Lila's voice. She wasn't breaking now. Then, hoofbeats thundered down the road. Ethan, he rode in fast, swinging off his horse before it even stopped moving. His boots hit the ground hard. His eyes scanned the chaotic scene, locked on Sarah. and then on Lila. He stepped forward, his voice steady, but cold as a mountain morning. That's enough. Lila whirled toward him, tears pouring again. Ethan, baby. She won't help me. Sarah's acting like she's your real wife. She's trying to take my place. Stop. His tone cut through the air like a blade. The crowd fell quiet. Ethan walked past Lila. He went straight to Sarah. He took her hand in a firm, steady grip, not tentative, not unsure. It was the grip of a husband claiming his wife. Then he faced Lila. You left? Lila, he said, his voice carrying across the yard. You ran away before our wedding. You took the money. You planned a life with another man. You admitted that child isn't my blood. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Ethan's voice deepened. Sarah didn't steal anything from you. Sarah has taken care of your son, with more love than you ever showed him. She saved my ranch. And she is my wife, because I chose her. Freely. Lila staggered backward, pale beneath the dust. You're lying. Ethan shook his head. No, I just stopped lying to myself. A sudden hush fell. Even the wind seemed to hold still. Lila sobbed once, harsh and ugly, then turned and scrambled back into the wagon. The man snapped the reins. Dust rose as they disappeared down the road, leaving behind only the echo of Lila's shame. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then old Mrs. Turner muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. About time someone shut that girl's mouth. A few people nodded. One or two patted Sarah's shoulder. And slowly, like fog lifting, the crowd dispersed. Ethan turned to Sarah, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. You all right? She breathed out, a weight lifting off her chest that she had carried for 28 years. I am now. Little Jack, who had been watching from the porch, reached for Sarah with both arms. She picked him up, and standing there in the warm dust of the yard, with the boy between them and the past finally behind them, Sarah realized something simple and true. This was her family now. Chosen, earned, and real. And nothing not Lila's lies, not the town's gossip, not even her own old fears could take that away. Later that evening, the sun began to dip below the horizon. They stepped out onto the porch, the evening sky opening wide above them, streaked with gold and lavender. One of those western sunsets that made even the hardest hearts feel humbled. The horses grazed quietly in the distance. The land stretched far and free. Sarah watched Ethan settle Jack onto his hip. He's ours, she whispered. He always will be, Ethan replied. He looked at the boy, then at Sarah. Blood don't make a father, Sarah. Love does. She leaned into him, letting her head rest against his shoulder. A long life waited ahead of them. It wouldn't be perfect. It wouldn't be without hardship. But it would be shared. They were no longer two broken people bound by circumstance. They were a family, and on that porch, with the world quiet and the man she loved standing beside her, Sarah finally understood that happiness didn't come from being chosen by fate. It came from choosing each other. Every single day. Their story, born from dust and heartbreak, became a testament to how even the most unlikely hearts can find their way home. And that, my friends, is where we leave Sarah and Ethan, under the vast sky of the American West. I'd love to know what you thought of their journey. Do you think Sarah was right to turn her sister away? Or is family always family, no matter what? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I read every single one of them. And tell me, where are you listening from today? It's always a joy to see how far these stories travel. If this story touched your heart, please do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share this with a friend who needs a little hope. And subscribe to Echoes of the West so I can keep bringing you more tales from the frontier. Until next time, keep your heart open and your boots dusty. Thank you for listening.